Welcome to another explainer. For decades, the whole subject of unidentified flying objects has been completely shrouded in rumors, pop culture, and just intense speculation. But today, we aren't looking at science fiction. We're looking squarely at the actual historical record to see exactly how the world's most powerful nations responded when confronted with things in their airspace that they simply could not explain.
Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We're going to cover The Skies Become Crowded, Project Blue Book, Managing Public Panic, Secrets Across the Pond, France's Scientific Pursuit, and finally, a new era of transparency.
All right, diving right into Section 1, The Skies Become Crowded.
To really set the stage here, we've got to look back to the late 1940s. The sheer volume of unexplained sightings had just begun to completely overwhelm military intelligence agencies, leaving defense officials basically scrambling for answers. And top-level military officials were expressing sheer astonishment at these early, highly technical European sightings. Just look at this quote from a top-secret November 1948 report by the U.S. Air Force Directorate of Intelligence. At the time, U.S. officers were consulting their peers in Sweden about recurring instances of unidentified objects over Europe. And this wasn't some fringe conspiracy, right? This was serious, high-level military analysis concluding that they were witnessing a level of technology that simply did not exist anywhere on Earth.
Moving on to Section 2, Project Blue Book.
So, faced with all of these mysteries, the U.S. government had to figure out a rapid, bureaucratic evolution just to process the chaos. The Air Force started out with Project Sign in 1947, which actually drafted an intelligence estimate suggesting these craft might be extraterrestrial. Well, that was quickly rejected by military brass for lack of physical proof, which led to Project Grudge in 1949. That era is often called the Dark Ages of UFO investigation because they basically had a strict debunking mandate. Finally, dissatisfaction among high-ranking generals led to the creation of the famous Project Blue Book in 1952. That was initially led by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, a really experienced airman who genuinely wanted to bring actual scientific rigor to the study.
Just look at that number, 12,618. By the time it officially closed down in 1969, Project Blue Book had collected a massive amount of UFO reports. They gathered, analyzed, and filed thousands of accounts from military personnel, pilots, and everyday civilians. Now, while the Air Force ultimately concluded that the vast majority were just misidentifications of natural phenomena or conventional aircraft, a staggering 701 of those reports were rigorously classified as completely unexplained. They absolutely defied any conventional scientific explanation.
Which brings us to Section 3, Managing Public Panic.
So while Blue Book is out there gathering data, a huge shift is happening behind the scenes. There was this stark contrast between what the public feared and what the government was actually worried about. The public was getting increasingly terrified of space travelers and alien invasions. But in early 1953, the CIA's Robertson Panel realized the real threat was the panic itself. The massive wave of UFO reports during the Big Flap of 1952 was literally clogging vital military communication channels in Washington, D.C. The Truman administration was terrified that an actual Soviet attack could be masked by a wave of UFO hysteria, or worse, that the Soviets could use the UFO craze as a psychological warfare tool to intentionally induce mass panic.
So how do you protect those communication lines from being swamped? Well, the Robertson Panel recommended a sweeping perception management campaign. They literally wrote that the government needed to strip UFOs of their special status and their aura of mystery. And how exactly did they pull this off? By initiating a highly coordinated campaign of education and, honestly, ridicule. They proposed using mass media, enlisting television figures, and even collaborating with Disney's animation studios to debunk sightings. The whole goal was to make the public feel silly for even reporting UFOs. By turning down the volume on the phenomenon, the military could ensure their intelligence channels stayed clear.
All right, Section 4, Secrets Across the Pond.
Now, you might be wondering, was the U.S. the only one dealing with this massive headache? Definitely not. Over in the UK, military intelligence officers faced extreme skepticism and mockery from their own superiors just for trying to do their jobs. Imagine having to start a serious intelligence briefing like this. This is an actual 1993 note by an unnamed wing commander in the secret UFO investigation branch of UK Defense Intelligence, known as DI-55. He was trying to warn his superiors that if these objects were real, their stealth and propulsion capabilities were a major national security concern. But he had to preface his warning so defensively because any official bringing up UFOs in Whitehall was immediately subjected to jokes about little green men and mass hallucinations.
And this kind of secrecy definitely didn't come cheap. £240,000. That is the estimated cost of the UK's highly secretive Project Condign.
Initiated in the late 1990s, this multi-year report analyzed over 10,000 possible UFO sightings collected over several decades. And get this, the project was handed off to a trusted defense contractor under an existing contract specifically to avoid competitive tendering. Why? Because the Ministry of Defense feared that an open bidding process would expose the study to too wide an audience and cause severe political embarrassment. So when Project Condign finally wraps up in 2000, it concluded there was absolutely no evidence of extraterrestrial origin. Instead, it blamed the sightings on something called plasmas. But here is the catch. The author of the report was completely hamstrung by intense security classifications. They weren't even allowed to interview the witnesses who actually saw the objects, and they couldn't consult with outside scientific experts. So if you think about it, the report essentially explained away one incredible mystery by citing another poorly understood fringe scientific phenomena.
Let's shift gears for Section 5, France's scientific pursuit.
While the US and the UK were really doubling down on defense, secrecy, and debunking, the French government took a remarkably different, civilian-led approach. Back in 1977, France established a unit called GI-PAN, operating right out of their National Space Agency. Instead of treating UFOs strictly as a military threat that had to be hidden, they treated them as an aerospace phenomenon that should be studied. They set up this brilliant system where the French Gendarmerie, their national police force, channeled sighting data directly to GI-PAN, and if physical traces were left behind, they utilized top-tier space agency resources for really thorough scientific investigations. What's even more impressive is that starting in 2007, they began opening all their archives to the public online, creating this uniquely transparent framework for studying these aerospace mysteries. And because of this incredibly diligent, open scientific methodology, GIPN has successfully explained about 97% of the sightings reported to them over the decades. But that leaves a tiny yet highly compelling 3% classified as genuinely unidentified. It's a small slice of the pie, sure, but it represents cases that have withstood absolute rigorous scientific scrutiny without yielding any conventional explanation.
Finally, that leads us right into Section 6, a new era of transparency. Before we dive into the newest files that literally just dropped, let's take a quick look at this comparison table. It perfectly summarizes the historical evolution we've been mapping out today. The US utilized Project Blue Book largely for perception management to prevent panic, the UK used Project Condign in secret to push the plasma theory, and France acted as the real outlier here, pushing for genuine scientific transparency. Keeping this context in mind is absolutely vital for understanding how huge this latest release of documents truly is.
And that brings us right up to a highly publicized moment in May 2026. Sharing in the widespread astonishment that pretty much everyone was feeling, this quote from the former president was posted to social media to accompany the Pentagon's newest release. The Defense Department published a massive trove of over 160 declassified UFO records onto a brand new public web portal called war.gov/UFO, citing a sudden call for unprecedented transparency.
These newly released files are peeling back the secrecy layer by layer, vividly documenting an incredible timeline of events. I mean, we now have documented reports of the Apollo 11 technical crew in 1969 observing strange flashes of light inside their cabin and an unidentified object on their way to the moon. We have the 1955 account of U.S. Senator Richard Russell reporting a flying disc aircraft right from a train window in the Soviet Union. And we even have a report as recent as September 2023 where multiple witnesses observed a metallic elliptical object floating above a tree line in restricted U.S. airspace before it simply disappeared.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with something to really think about. Whether it's the 701 unexplained cases from Project Blue Book, or that 3% of mysteries verified by French scientists, or even these brand new files released by the Pentagon this year, while Cold War perception management solved the immediate threat of public panic and clogged phone lines, it never actually solved the core mystery, did it? The truth of that lingering percentage remains just as captivating and as completely unresolved as ever. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep your eyes on the skies.